These are some of the nastiest parts I've ever bought, but I'm determined to make a decent gaming computer out of them. Hey everybody, it's Chris from FamilyGeekery, and today I've got some parts here that I'm going to be building a computer out of, and these came to me super cheap and super nasty, and sometimes you just take what you can get, but I'm bound and determined to make something out of these for two reasons really. One, of course I'm always up for a challenge, and two, it came with a chip that I've never built with before. This is an i7 3820, which is a socket 2011 chip. I've never built with one of these before, so it'll be fun to try it out and see how it goes. But let's see what we got here, what we're starting with. So from what I can tell, someone took an Alienware computer and basically just stripped it out completely out of the case and gave me these parts. So we're starting with this motherboard here, which like I said was a socket 2011, and it's pretty dirty, so we're going to clean that up. It's got this i7 3820, which is a Sandy Bridge CPU, which kind of surprised me. I wasn't sure that it would be a Sandy Bridge, but that's what it says it is. 4 cores, 8 threads. I think it's 3.6 gigahertz clock speed, so we'll be able to get some power out of that thing. I think it's got like a TDP of 130 watts, so that's it's power hungry for sure. It came installed with 4 sticks of 4 gigabyte of RAM, so we got 16 gigs to start with. They included this nasty AIO, and look at that. Now I'm not going to ever tell anybody what to do with their spare time, but don't do it near your computer. That's just nasty. So I don't even think we're going to use this at all. I wouldn't trust it. I don't want to spend the time cleaning it up, so we're probably just going to toss that in the trash. And this right here, it had 2 of these, and this is a GTX 660, I believe, and there was 2 of them in there. It must have been like an SLI configuration. I picked the cleaner of the 2. Now this is a pretty old and pretty underpowered GPU. We're going to boot it up with this just to see if it works and see, what kind of performance we can get out of it. But I think this system is going to be better paired with something like a 1060. A 1060 will be a little bit better for the processor and a little bit better with modern games. So before we start cleaning anything up or putting anything together, let's look at some of the parts that I got to go ahead and complete this build. And I've got here a tower cooler made by Up Here, and I got this one because of the socket size. There's a lot of better coolers and a lot of nicer coolers, but it's just hard to find one that had this socket size at least listed. There may be, some of the standard ones may fit that one with different brackets, but this one specifically said that it supports the 2011 socket. We've also got a T-Force Vulcan Z 1 terabyte SSD. That's going to give it plenty of room for games. Got a Thermaltake 500 watt Smart Series power supply. Now again, I'm trying to keep this build somewhat on a budget because the end result isn't going to be a super fast computer. So I don't want to put a whole bunch of really, really nice, parts in it and it end up being a budget computer in the end. So we're going budget on the parts, we're going budget on the build, and to complete that, I do have a kind of a budget case, which is a Thermaltake Versa H18, I think it is. So when it comes time to pull that out, I'll go over all the different specs that thing's got. So now that we know what we're going to be building, let's go ahead and get these parts ready. I'm going to toss this thing, clean up the board a little bit, and then get ready to at least get this thing booted up and tested out in BIOS. Alright, so I got the parts cleaned up pretty good. I pulled the RAM out just to get them out and let the sockets, kind of get blown out when I blew out the whole motherboard with I've got a high-speed blower, and so we can reseat those back in there. I've got the CPU ready to be installed. I did do some cleaning on the GPU also. Even if we're not going to be using it for the final build, it's still nice to have it clean around the shop. You can see just with my first wipe how much yuck I took off of it. So gave that a pretty decent cleaning, at least cleaned up all the surface plastic and stuff. Blew out these fans because they were kind of nasty. And there is signs of like some surface rust on some of the metal, some of the cheap metal, some of the flimsy metal. So that's kind of indicative that this thing was probably sitting in a storage unit or something, and it got cold and hot or something, and that might have caused some of that rot to start up. But I'm pretty happy with this board because it came out of Alienware, and I was kind of afraid that it was going to be very proprietary, but it's got the standard power sockets. It's got what looks to be the standard micro ATX pin or screw holes, so it should be able to go in a case. It's got standard pin headers for USB and for audio, and it's even got USB 3 on this one. So I think we're going to be able to do a good job with this. Alright, so next steps, we're going to get this CPU installed in here, pop the RAM back in there, and then we're going to open up the CPU cooler and see what it takes to install that. So, like I said, this is the first time I've used this type of socket, and you can see already the biggest difference is 2 levers on the cage here, and some markings on here as far as like lock and unlock. So let's go ahead and get this CPU in here. And there is a triangle right here in the CPU, so we'll match that with the right corner, and there's a triangle on the bracket right here. So I think we're good to go for setting this straight down in this direction. And it seats in there pretty good. So now we're going to set this down, and this one's not going to lock first. I think we need to lock this one down first. And you can see right here that this one actually locks that one down in place. So let's push this one down and lock it in. And I think we're good on that. So let's pop this RAM in here. And you can see the RAM banks are on opposite sides of the CPU. This is kind of indicative of like a server setup, and that is the type of socket that you'd see on some of the servers. So that must have been what they were going for. So again, line up the notch with the offset on each of the sockets. I try to get it in there somewhat flush, and then give it a little right-left action real quick. Get both of those snaps in there. After I get 2 sticks of RAM in, I always run my fingers across to make sure one isn't, offset from the other one. And there we go. So let's go ahead and get this cooler out of the package and see what it's going to take to mount up onto the motherboard. Alright, so this cooler is it's got really good instructions, and it comes with some really neat supplies to get it set up on the motherboard. And like I said, we could have got an expensive one like a Noctua. They did make one for this socket type, but then you're spending like 60-70 bucks for a cooler on a system that, I paid like 30 bucks for all these parts. So that just didn't seem right. This was more in the $20 to $30 range, and I think it's going to do just fine. So the bracket on the bottom actually has several different steps here that you can retract or push in each of these corners depending on the socket type. And that's going to set up the spacing right. So we're going to put this underneath. It's got a bag labeled Intel, which has the 2 side brackets, and then it had a separate bag for the 2011 for different size standoffs. So we're going to put this on, put the standoffs on, put the brackets on, and then screw this guy down on here. Now, one problem I see so far is the size of this guy here is not going to allow, I don't think, me to mount this way. So I'm going to have to mount it horizontal. Now luckily it looks like the bracket spacing will go either this way or that way, so I think I'll be fine there. So I think I'm going to mount it this way, and I think the top of the case is going to be a mesh case, so I'll be able to suck in some fresh air and blow it over the CPU that way. Not ideal, but we'll make it work. Alright, so I learned something, and that's exactly what I wanted to do with this type of build by using a new socket. So if you look at this, it's got the markings, like I said, for the different sockets. It didn't have one that said 2011, but for the brackets it showed the 2011 and the 1366 being the same size. So that's what I set it on, and the spacing did match the 4 holes for the socket itself. So I figured that's what it was going to be. But these special standoffs here, when I put them through, they didn't even penetrate the back of the motherboard to get anywhere near screwing into here. So I thought, uh-oh, this is not good. But then I turned it around and to see if one side was longer than the other, and it's not so much that one side was longer than the other, but one side is thicker than the other. So the thicker end actually threads right in here. So that's why this didn't say specifically 2011, because we don't even need that. So I'm going to thread these guys in, put the bracket on, and see what we can do with the cooler. Alright, so I did try mounting the brackets this way and setting the cooler on top, and as I feared, it does not clear this guy here. So I moved him this way, and now you can see that's going to have plenty of clearance. So now it's just a matter of taking off the protective film here. It came with some thermal paste, so I'll put down some new thermal paste. We got to take off the fan to get to the mounting holes, and then we're going to send these guys down in to hold that on. Then we'll put the fan back on. And it actually came with 2 more brackets in case you wanted to put a fan on the other side, so that was nice. Alright, we got that snugged down, and time to replace the fan back on, and then plug it in. There's the CPU fan header right over here. I really hate these mounting brackets, but I got it on the first time, so I'm going to consider myself lucky today. Alright, so I think the next step is going to be hooking up a power supply and a monitor and seeing if I can get this thing to boot up. So I've got it on an anti-static bag. This is an anti-static mat, but I always use a bag just in case. And because this i7 does not have integrated graphics, I'm going to have to put my trusty little test card here in. So I'm going to use a couple of these Rubbermaid guys here just to give it a little bit of clearance off the bottom so I can plug this in. So let's get the power supply out, let's get some cables hooked up, and get ready to boot this bad boy. Alright, welcome back to about an hour and a half of troubleshooting. And that's what you get into sometimes when you're dealing with these old parts. But as it turns out, I hooked everything up, tried to boot it up, and everything fired up, but just nothing on the screen. So I tried to make sure all the connections were good. Same thing, fired up, but nothing's on the screen. I changed the jumper settings here for the CMOS, clearing out the CMOS. That didn't do anything. I changed out the CMOS battery just in case. That didn't do anything. I changed GPUs. That didn't do anything. I took one bank of RAM out. So I found a manual for it online that said either have 2 in here or 2 in here plus 2 in here. So I took these out. It didn't fire up. I changed the power supply out just to see if that could have been the problem. That didn't work. I took out the other set of RAM and put in just a spare set of RAM I had, and then it fired up. So hey, at least I got it going. So I thought, okay, maybe just this pair of RAM was bad. So I took the pair that I had already taken out of here, put it in there, and it fired up. So I thought, okay, so maybe it was just that left side pair, the original pair that was on this side was bad. And I thought, what the heck, let's go ahead and put it in over here, put it in over there, and sure enough, it fired up. So what was the problem? I don't know. It's just one of those mysteries. Took the RAM out of here, put it there, put the RAM out of here, put it there, and everything worked. Sometimes it just needs to be reseated. I don't know if that was the case, but it took about an hour and a half of troubleshooting. So without any further ado, let's slap the power supply on. I've got my push button here wired up to the front panel connector for the power button, and I should be able to push this button and this thing will fire up and we'll see something on the screen. Alright, so obviously that wasn't exactly all the problem, I guess. So in the meantime, I went ahead and changed out the power supply again, and sure enough, I've got it now that it's working pretty solid. So everything's booting up every single time. I just spent about an hour installing Windows onto an SSD just to kind of test the power supply, test the stability of the system, and still kind of get something done at the same time. So a little bit of multitasking. So installed Windows, get it all updated just by throwing a SATA cable right here onto that SATA SSD. And it's been running about an hour, probably hour and a half of installs and updates and reboots, and everything's working solid. So I'm not sure if that power supply is bad, or if possibly the high TDP of this processor just was pulling too much, maybe from the 12 volt bus on that 500 watt power supply. 500 watts should be enough, but something just wasn't right with it. So I'll worry about that later. Right now I've got a different power supply on it that's booting every time. So let's go ahead and get that case out, and let's start getting this thing inside a case. So here it is, the Thermaltake Versa H18TG. TG standing for tempered glass. So there is one side panel that's all glass, all the way from the top to the bottom. So I took that off, and it looks like we got 120 millimeter fan sending out the back. And we've got right up top here a magnetic dust cover covering up another fan input that I think we're going to be perfect for that fan that we have on the processor pulling air straight down through here. So we'll be able to pull down and then spit it out. Looks like we got room for probably 3 more fans up front if we need. I don't think we're going to need to on this particular build. I'm not going to have a huge amount of heat building up in here with either a 1060 or whatever we decide to put in for the GPU. So let's go ahead and open this thing up and start putting some stuff in it. Alright, so I've used this case several times before on some budget builds. This isn't a top of the line case, but it's a great case if you need just a good quality sound case, great bang for the buck. So it'll fit either a mini ITX or a micro ATX in here. It won't fit a full-size ATX, so if you need that, you'll need to have a bigger case. But I've got the extra standoffs, put those in there. Those should line up. It's got room for a couple 2.5-inch drives right here. It's got some keyholes, and it's got the mounting hardware is labeled, used for 2.5-inch SSD. And then down in the basement down here, behind where the power supply sits, are some mounting holes if you have some 3.5-inch hard drives. So we're not going to use that in this build, but it's nice to know that it's there in case you want some expansion. So let's go ahead and get the CPU, or the motherboard and CPU and everything mounted down here, and let's do it. So if you watched me build before, you know that I like to always test out my motherboard standoff screws first, because although most of them are the same size, I've had some cases that had a different size thread. So I grabbed the one that I think is the most logical one, throw it on a magnetic tip screwdriver, which is your best friend, and then pick one of these standoffs and just make sure that it threads cleanly all the way down and all the way up. Make sure you're not cross-threading. Make sure it's the right thread size and the right length, and that's the right one. So now we can go ahead and grab the motherboard and line it up. And again, because this one came from an Alienware case, there was no I/O shield for it. So we're going to have an open I/O area, but that just makes it easier for me. And it looks like on this case, the middle standoff right here is got a little post on it, which makes it easy to line up. And just like that, I think I'm lined up everywhere. So let's start sending some screws down. Alright, and when I put these screws in, I usually do them about 80% tight, just to make sure that all the lines line up. You may need to kind of shift the board one way or another, and then after that, I just go back around and give them just a little extra snug. And there you go. Alright, tiny speed bump, but I've got a solution. This motherboard only has, it's got 2 system fan headers and 1 CPU fan header. And both the system fan headers, this one here, and there's one back here at the top corner, they're both being used by those fans that are built onto the motherboard. So there's a couple ways you can fix this, because I've got this fan here to plug in, and one is using a fan splitter. So I've got this fan splitter here. It's got one connector for your motherboard here, and then it's got 2 connectors on this side. And the other solution is something like this, which is just a Molex connector that splits out to a couple fan connectors. So I think I'm going to go this route, because we'll have a Molex connector in the back. I'll just route the cable behind here, plug this in, the fan will be powered up full time. And I'm choosing this route because I don't want to split one of those onboard ones, just in case the motherboard itself, the BIOS or something, is monitoring these fan headers and making sure that the revolutions are good. I wouldn't want that to be messed up by a splitter. Alright, next step, I'm going to go ahead and install the power supply, and there's nothing fancy about this one, no plate on the side to worry about. We're just going to pop it in there, screw it down. There is down here a screen mesh for the intake, so that's always nice. So let's go ahead and pop in this PSU. Alright, I got the power supply mounted. I've got the main power plugged in. I got the ATX power plugged in here. Not going to lie, that was kind of a pain in the butt because of the big tower here, and because of this VRM cooler. It was just real hard to get my hand in there, and I may or may not have left a little DNA inside the case in the process, but don't worry, I cleaned it up. So we got that done. I've got popping out here for now the wrong power connector. This is the SATA. So I'm going to have the PCIe popping out here in just a second. That'll be ready for when we put a GPU in. So let's go ahead and get some of these front I/O panel wires plugged in. We're going to have just the normal ones, the power switch, the reset, the audio, the USB 3, and then there is a Molex connector back here also in this bundle that handles the RGB lights on the front. So let me go ahead and get some of those wired up. Alright, while I'm working on the cabling back here, I went ahead and got the SSD ready to mount, and this one has little rubber grommets and like the standoff screws, and you put 3 of them in. You can see there's 3 keyholes, and then once you're ready, you're going to just keyhole that in there, and then you'll send 1 screw from the front back into the last remaining hole on the SSD. So let me go ahead and get that hooked up and wired up with some power and SATA, and then I'll finish cleaning up these wires. Alright, so I think I got everything wired up and tidied up in the back. I went ahead and installed that GTX 660 in here through a 6-pin PCIe connector on there, and we're going to boot this thing up temporarily, maybe run some tests on it, and then find a better GPU for it. So let me hook up some mouse and keyboard and monitor, and I'll be right back. Alright, she's got power. Here's my little portable monitor here. I got a mouse and keyboard hooked up. So let's smash this power button. And so far so good. We got power, all the fans are moving, that's good. And we've got video. So I guess that graphics card was good after all, just needed a little cleaning. And let's go ahead and check out the task manager. See what we got here. It sees the i7 3820 CPU, 16 gigs of memory at 1600 megahertz. There's my 1 terabyte SSD, and it already knows it's got a GTX 660 in it. So I guess loading the drivers up with that other NVIDIA card, I probably at least downloaded some basic NVIDIA graphics, and then you can download the updated drivers later in Windows. So I'm going to run a benchmark on this, and just to make sure it can fully handle all the power of all the GPU and CPU hitting full speed all at the same time. So let me run that, and I'll be right back. Alright, so I just ran user benchmark, and just wanted to see what the graphics score was. Obviously this is an old system with an old GPU, and this system was originally set up with 2 of these GPUs, an SLI, so this is even getting less than optimal power graphics wise, so we can see that this gaming score of 23, and I'm really just looking at this and then the graphics score down here to see what happens when we threw this 1060 in it, and we're looking at 19.5%, very poor. I've seen worse, I've seen a lot better. So now that we've got that in mind, let's go ahead and pop out this GPU, throw in a 1060, and I think that'll be a little bit more balanced for what this machine should have in it, and let's see what these scores are then. Alright, so now we got this EVGA GeForce GTX 1060. This is a 6 gig version, so let's go ahead and run that same test again and see how we do. Alright, so here's our results. Now we're getting a 50% gaming score. I've got the other one still open in the tab here at 23%, so that's a considerable upgrade. Now everything's in the green here, and let's look at our graphics card. We're looking at a 60.3, which is good, which is opposed to that 19.5. So this is much more balanced now. I think between the CPU and the GPU, you'll be able to have a good experience with any game. You're going to have some games that are going to bottleneck the CPU, some games are going to bottleneck the GPU, but one isn't like a million times better than the other. So this is what I try to get in a budget build, is to have something that's balanced out like that. So really the only thing left to do is to throw some games on it, put the side panel back on, and this thing's ready to go. Now if we look on the front of this thing, very simple design. It's got a nice full mesh cover to have lots of airflow if you need. And then we've got just this blue line here, LED, just an accent light, and there's a button here that you can turn that on and off. That's the only thing that's coming off of that Molex power connector that's on the front. So it wasn't RGB after all, it's just a simple line, and sometimes that's good, just have some kind of simple accent to your case, and in this case it works great. So I think that's going to do it for this build. I think it's all done and it's ready to go. Let me know in the comments below what you think about this, what changes you would have made if you were putting it together. Let me know if you want to see more builds like this. I've got lots of parts and lots of systems to build up, I guess. We need to clear out some of the shop here, got too many parts. So I have fun building these things. Hopefully you guys have fun watching me build them. If you do, go ahead and give me that thumbs up. If you want to see more, hit that subscribe button so that you can watch me build some more. And thank you as always for watching. Until next time, peace out and geek out.